Hi, I'm Haley Menard from The Sugar Burger, and today we have the Battle of the Batches. 3 different chocolate chip cookie recipes are going to fight for top spot. We have our New York Times fancy chocolate chip cookie recipe, the Grand Floridian Disney Resort cookies, and finally, these old standby, back of the bag chocolate chip cookies. So the first recipe is going to be the New York Times chocolate chip cookie. This has become pretty popular. It definitely has some added steps that other recipes don't and has some extra fussiness with the ingredients. So we're going to get this started. First off, we are going to, as always, and every recipe will be the same with this, cream the butter and sugar. For our butter and sugar, we have 2.5 sticks of unsalted butter. The recipe doesn't say this, but I softened it to room temperature because it's pretty hard to cream cold butter into sugar. For the sugar, we have 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of white granulated sugar, and then we have 1.25 cup of brown sugar. As all recipes for chocolate chip cookies say, we're supposed to beat this sugar and butter until it's fluffy. I know that's kind of subjective, but I'm going to give you the phase that I deem fluffy, which will be a few minutes into beating. Our butter and sugar has been whipped up into a frenzy. The next step is going to be adding the eggs. This recipe calls for 2 eggs. We are adding eggs 1 at a time. Egg number 2. And we are going to mix together. Now that our dough is together, we are going to do the fun part, which is adding the chocolate chips. This recipe calls for an egregious amount of chocolate chips, 1.25 pounds, which is 20 ounces, which is 2 bags of chocolate chips. So you don't have to tell me twice. Like I've said before, if you're not prepared to take on the extra indulgence of dessert, just like have a banana. I used dark chocolate chips for this. With all of the sweetness in this recipe, that's a good call, and it's also what they asked me to do. 1 more scrape to make sure that everything's really well incorporated, like these delicious 20 ounces of chocolate chips. Oh no. Everybody's combined. Good dough so far. The next step of this is why you're gonna have to make these ahead if you want to enjoy them. This recipe calls to refrigerate the dough for at least 24 hours. You might be like, why would I want to do that? Well, I Googled it for you, so don't worry. We want to make sure the butter gets cold again. And what that's gonna do is it's going to make the cookie, once it's in the oven, spread evenly and more slowly. Does this make a cookie better? Depends on how you like your chocolate chip cookies. If you use this warm butter and threw it in the oven, it's just gonna spread more quickly, so you're gonna get that like more crispy chocolate chip cookie as opposed to a more chewy chocolate chip cookie. But for this one, we are going to toss this guy in the fridge overnight. Oh my God. Lucky for you, I made one of these doughs yesterday, and it has been chilling in the fridge for 24 hours. We are going to go ahead and get it in the oven. The recipe says to make the cookies the size of a generous golf ball. Generous is subjective, and also golf balls only come in one size. So they did give another measurement of 3.5 ounces, which I think I'm gonna go with instead of what I think is a generous golf ball. As you can tell, this dough chilled super hard. So I'm gonna do my best to give it a scoop and see how much 1 ice cream scoop of this dough weighs. That's only 3. That's a huge cookie. We're gonna go with 3 ounces. I know I said follow it to a T, but like honestly, I'm not gonna fuss over 1/2 ounce. The last step to make these extra decadent is adding sea salt on top. So salty sweet's always a good idea. We'll just give each one of these guys a little sprinkle. I don't really wanna go too crazy because there is already a lot of salt in this recipe. These are now ready for the oven. 350 degrees, 18 to 20 minutes. So we will check them after 18 to see how they're going. All right, let's see. Oh, these are so not done. These need the 2 minutes. Here are our New York Times fancy cookies. I guess they didn't spread too crazy thin. This one looks beautiful. So let's get these guys on a cooling rack and we'll move on to our next recipe. The second cookie in our cookie war is from the Grand Floridian Resort in Disney World. So these are hailed as some of the best chocolate chip cookies. Instead of granulated sugar, it's using a combination of brown sugar and powdered sugar. That should give it a little bit of a lighter texture and a little bit of a crisp on top. But just like with all three, we are creaming our butter and sugar first until fluffy. This is 10 tablespoons of butter, which is a stick and a bit. In here, we have 3/4 of a cup of powdered sugar and 1 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Since this is powdered sugar, I'm gonna start off a little bit slow so that I don't like inhale it all coming out of the bowl. Oh, I need another spatula. Susan, I'm going through spatulas like crazy. I hope Nate does the dishes. We are now in the fluffy territory with our butter and sugar. The next step, just like the last recipe, is to add the eggs and vanilla. Same as last recipe, 2 eggs, 2 teaspoons of vanilla. I think this batter already looks very different. So looser batter. This recipe calls for the flour and leavener and salt to be sifted together. We have 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And that's going in 2.5 cups of flour. Give it a mix. You hear your mixer getting tired. That's how you know the flour is incorporated in there. Looks good. The final step, of course, is to add the chocolate chips. Unlike the last recipe we put together, this has a meager 12 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate chips. I'm not a huge fan of semi-sweet. I think that like dark chocolate's better with the already sweet cookie, but we're gonna give it a go. We're gonna follow instructions. This recipe is now ready to be put on a baking sheet. The recipe recommends 2 tablespoons if you want large cookies, but this doesn't need to be refrigerated. It can just go on the sheet and go in the oven at 330 degrees, which is super specific and super weird, but good for them for finding out that that worked the best. Since I've used every dish in my house to complete this mission of testing all the chocolate chip cookies, we're gonna have to use my heart-shaped tablespoon. I'm gonna do like a little unorthodox like pattern here, because I have way too much dough. I'll be doing this all night. These Grand Floridian cookies are going in our 330 degree oven for 12 to 14 minutes. Out come the Grand Floridians. These are noticeably very different than the New York Times cookies. We have a little bit more fluff to them, it looks like. Also, I'm seeing some like peaks and like, you know, they're not as flat of a cookie. It looks like they have a little bit more texture to them on the top. And I think that's probably because of the powdered sugar. That's gonna make more of a crust top rather than the granulated. The GFs. They look like a Disney cookie for sure. Our final contender is just the regular, basic, everyman's back of the bag recipe. Back of the bag? Oh, it's upside down. All right. So, just like all the other ones, we're creaming our butter and sugar. We have 1 cup of butter, which is 2 sticks, and we have 3/4 cups each of granulated sugar and brown sugar. And away we go. We are fluffed up, so we are adding 2 eggs and again 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Oh, gross. I'm gonna give this a little scrape and then add our dry ingredients, which is 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. And then we have a teaspoon of baking soda and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, which is the same as the Grand Floridian. So really the only difference right now appears to be the amount of butter and the use of the powdered sugar from the Grand Floridian. Obviously the New York Times has a bunch of maybe necessary differences, we'll see. Now we're gonna add the chocolate chips. Again, this recipe only calls for 1 bag of chocolate chips, not 2. And by the way, I know that Toll House is kind of like the standard for back of the bag recipes, but I compared them with the Ghirardelli, I don't know how to say it, I'm not a San Franciscan recipe. And it's exactly the same, except that this one has 2 teaspoons of vanilla and obviously uses their chocolate chips. So let's add these in. Let's give this a little mixeroo. The back of the bag says to do tablespoon size drops for this cookie. I don't think I've ever done that. I think I'm probably a little more liberal with it. So I guess there's a first time for everything. We are going to bake these at 375, which is our hottest baking cookie. Oh, I need to start that over. I threw away the secret texts. It was, but for how long? 9 to 11 minutes. All right, I'm back. We're going to bake these at 375 for 9 to 11 minutes, and they go. I'll start with 10 this time. Here are our regular back of the bag chocolate chip cookies. They definitely got flatter than the rest of the cookies, which after reading about butter temperature and how it causes your cookies to spread or not spread, makes total sense because this was a very hot bake and our butter was room temperature and not chilled. So you're gonna see that they're all pretty much flat and it looks like their edges are nice and brown. So I bet you these are gonna be kind of crispy. So that's it. All of our cookies are baked and ready for battle. We are going to have the famous Mr. Menard pop in and give his ever increasingly brutal review of all of these cookies to find out who's the champion. So Nate's here to put all the questions to rest about which chocolate chip cookie is the best. He's blindfolded, not for sexual purposes, for cookie purposes. We're going to do these out of order compared to how we baked them today, just to like add some confusion into the mix. This is going to be cookie A, and I'm gonna put it in his mouth. Are you ready? You have to, no hands. No. Open your mouth. I don't want you to touch it. And now bite. Okay, now you can chew it.
It's nice. It's nice and soft. There's a good little crunch on the edge. It's a good cookie. Good chocolate chips.
All right, so 1 to 10, because we have to make it a fair competition.
Like a 7.5.
Oh my God. Okay. All right, we're gonna go cookie B. Do you feel your palate is cleansed enough for cookie B?
Could use some milk. I'm just kidding.
All right, here you go. Open your mouth. All right, good job.
First one tastes better.
Oh, immediate. So what number would you give this one?
Like a 5.
Oh my God. Okay, here, I got your rinse. Too much? Okay, all right. All right, cookie C.
That's a contender. The first one and the third one are thick. I say the first one's the best.
All right.
I'll bring it up to an 8.
Wow.
Oh.
The third one is a 7.5.
The third one's a 7.5, this one's an 8. The winner, you can take off your blindfold now if you wanna see, is the Grand Floridian chocolate chip cookie. The mouse has it right, he knows how to bake. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you. This is not a paid sponsorship.
So here we are. I'd like to present the Grand Floridian Disney Resort chocolate chip cookie with the Best in Show trophy. And since this is the only one we have in the house, the chili pepper it is. Congratulations to this awesome cookie. I'm sure it'll be making many more showings in our kitchen.